a question for you guys. How do you judge if a book has been well loved? Because between me and my mom, who are both avid readers, we have a completely different opinion on how you can tell if a book has been loved. I am the person that takes care of my books. I completely try to make sure they're pristine, nice, neat, like this one, for example. I've had this for a very long time, years and years. I've read it several times, and I have tried to keep it in the best pristine condition. I don't crease pages, I don't fold pages, I try not to make the binding too loose, because I feel like you loved a book if you took care of it really well, and it sits on your shelf and it doesn't look like it's been read even though you've read it several times, and so it lasts as long as it possibly can. My mom, on the other hand, says that a book is well loved when you crease the pages in, you have the binding falling apart, it looks like it's ripped and tattered and torn and looks old, and that's how you can tell that it's well loved. I'd like to know your opinion. Are you a pristine book person to try and keep it in the best condition and last the longest, or are you somebody who thinks that a well beat up book is the sign of it being well loved and well read? I'd love to know. Alright, let's go ahead and get on today's class. Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. It's great to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. Today's class might be a little bit of a surprise, considering I didn't give any advanced warning or prep you in any way for this class to come out. But I had been thinking that it takes me a long time to get through a book. Obviously, I go really in depth, and there's several classes just for one story or one book in order to get through it and discuss everything. And I was thinking that because it takes me so long, I don't have a large variety of content on this channel yet, just since I focus on one story and all the classes that go along with that story. And depending on what story I'm doing, it might not be your cup of tea, maybe you tried it, maybe it's not something you're interested in, whatever else. So it takes a while of a lot of classes in order to get to something that you might enjoy better. So with that in mind, I thought I would try doing 2 books at once now. I will do an urban fantasy book, so we will still finish the 3rd book of Mercy Thompson, and then I will also try and do a high fantasy book alongside it. So we get a little bit more diversity and a little bit more coming your way classes-wise that you might be interested in reading and joining in on. So with that in mind, we are also going to be covering the Belgariad series, and this is by David Eddings. The first one is Pawn of Prophecy, and we are going to talk about the first 5 chapters in this class. So for me, that was pages 1 through, let me double check, 70. So it's 70 pages, about kind of like what a Dragonlance set of 5 chapters would be. Though it is a little bit of a smaller book, as you can tell just by it's not quite as thick or as big as a Dragonlance book. And that includes the prologue as well. We'll be talking about the prologue. So I hope that you enjoy this. I hope it gives it a little bit more variety, something more that you can sink your teeth into. Obviously, it will take me a little bit longer to complete the books, just since at this moment I can only get about 1 video out a week, if that. But I'm going to work on it. I'm going to try really hard to get you out some classes a little bit more and try and make it so you're not waiting forever for the next section to come out. So please bear with me, and as always, I'd love to hear your comments, any questions and concerns, as always, here or on any of my social media. And yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about today's story. We'll always start with our recap, and let's go ahead. So we start the story in the prologue with a short history or mythology of how this world has gotten to the point that it's at. It's kind of got its creation story and the creation of the artifact called the orb, and how the gods have used to be a part of this world, part of the mortal world, and how they ended up leaving, and what kind of conflict that is happening in the world as of starting the story. So we see all that history, or I guess you could say mythology, depending on how you view it. of how this world has transitioned to the point that it's going to be at the beginning of the story, and how the orb came into the river line. Then it starts off with Garon being in this small farm, little town, being a small boy. I believe he's 9, or a little bit younger than 9 when we first start. And he's being taken care of by his Aunt Pole at Falder's farm. We see him as a very curious, very adventurous type of boy, someone who likes to get into a little bit of mischief, a little bit of trouble. Nothing too bad, but definitely is somebody who takes his little chances with his aunt. And then we see him grow up a little bit older, and we meet the storyteller, which becomes known as Mr. Wolf to Garon, who comes to visit, and he takes Garon to another town, the next town over or whatever. It's a little bit of a bigger place than Falder Farm, and they are planning on staying there, getting some spices, doing a little bit of adventuring for Garon. And it's called Fennel Lane. So they end up going to Fennel Lane, and at the spice store, they end up running into a Murgo, who takes a particular interest in Garon. And as we have learned, the Murgos are on the wrong side of the conflict. They're on the opposing side with Kaltorak. So the Murgo tries to give him a coin, which Mr. Wolf stops him from getting. And the two of them pretend to be somebody that they're not. They really try to hide and conceal who they really are. Even though Garon doesn't truly know what the reason for this is, he easily plays along with it and lies about who he is to the Murgo. So they're hoping that they will not be too interested in who they are anymore afterward. So they end up not staying there under the watchful guise of the Murgo, and goes back to Falder Farm. Then, when Garon reaches the age of 14, a couple of Murgos stop by trying to buy some pigs and trying to buy some meat. Unfortunately for the Murgo, it's a holiday and Falder will not do it until the next day, so they stay and wait and do ask questions about Garon, who they, at least about Garon, who he was pretending to be. And then Mr. Wolf returns, and he's calling for Aunt Pole to come with him, and that she is urgently needed. She tells him that she's not going to go with him unless she can bring Garon, which at first he fights, but then decides, okay, he can come along. And just before they're going to leave, they find out that one of the new hands, Brill, has been watching her. And they stop him, and all, with the help of Dernick, and all 4 of them, Mr. Wolf, Aunt Pole, Dernick, and Garon, are getting ready to escape Falder's farm. So, there we go. There's our recap of the first 5 chapters. It's kind of interesting since this story starts off a little slow. Not slow in a bad way, but just more like we're just seeing Garon grow up a little bit and seeing a little bit about his childhood. And we're not actually like in the middle of things yet. We have a lot of mystery. We have obviously some urgency with them needing to leave. But other than that, we don't really understand the position that they're in right now. We don't really know what's happening elsewhere other than at this farm, and that Garon's been pretty sheltered. So let's go ahead and just talk about the basic book structure just to start off with. Basic things when you pick up a book and you start reading, you notice what the layout is of the book. So when you open it up, we do have a map of the world. Obviously, it doesn't have absolutely everything on it since we don't see Meloria on here, which is where Kaltorak was supposed to be, and his people were supposed to be moved away to. But we do see all the other areas where all the sons ended up settling. We see Sindaria, which is where we're at currently. So we see a good chunk from one sea to the other sea of land. Maps are always interesting when it's a fantasy story because you really get to like see like where they are, where they've gone, that kind of stuff. So I always find maps really interesting and really enjoy that they put them in there. And then of course we have the prologue. And after the prologue, we've got the actual base of the story, and it is separated into different parts since we have part 1 here, which is Sandaria. So we know that Sandaria is the location. So obviously this part 1 is going to be dealing with them being in Sandaria. At least that's the impression that you would get, considering part 1 is called Sandaria. I would assume that part 2 would be once they're out of Sandaria, they would be in a different place and would start the next part. We will have to find out why it is separated in part 1, part 2, however many parts it ends up being, and why it's considered the sectioned off and where they're at. We're gonna see if that's significant or not. Maybe it's just the way the author decided to organize it, or maybe it has some kind of meaning, just like we had our parts in Dragonlance. There was book 1, book 2, and a couple had book 3 in the middle of each book. And of course they always had the drawing or something to kind of to signify what the important part of that book was. That book inside the book, if that makes sense. So we have a similar concept here. And then after we start part 1, we've got another map, which is of Sandaria and more up-close personal view. So we can actually see, versus the bigger map that had more detailed of the whole world, this one has details that you would miss in the bigger map. So you can actually see where they're at. It even shows Falder's Farm on there and a little bit of the area around it. We see we see a bunch of different tracks here, and looks like Falder's Farm was the main thing pinpointed. I don't see the village they went to. Sorry, couldn't think for a second there. So we know where we're at. We know where we're starting. We're not sure quite yet where we're going. That is still a mystery, and we'll have to find out how that goes. So that's the basic layout of our book here, and that we can instantly see right off the bat. So let's go ahead and start with the prologue. Of course, the prologue is kind of separated since it is overarching all the parts. It's not included in part 1. I found the prologue to be very interesting. We have some prologues in other books that we've gone through with Dragonlance, but this one's very different. This one really has a couple of different purposes. 2 main purposes, to be exact. The first one is setting up the world. So we set up the world by letting the reader know this is the kind of world that you're entering into. It makes it so you understand that this is going to be a world that has gods in it, that has conflict in it, major conflict, possibly going with war. We've got this world that includes magic users. We've got this world that has kings and queens and royalty. We've got characters that can be immortal and are going to have wisdom or some other trait that immortality gives them. We really see the creation of this world, which gives us some world building of history and of mythology, of who these characters worship, who these characters are going to know of this history, and that it's going to be a part of them. So we already are seeing this world taking shape just by knowing the beginning of the story of how it was formed and how it ends up being where it's at. Because we have all those suns that settle, so now we know, okay, this is how this land came to be and this land came to be. So we really get a lot of, as a reader, a lot of information about what this kind of story is going to be about and what kind of world this story is going to be. The world actually gives you a lot of information about the story and what kind of story it's going to be when you understand that this is the foundation. the world is the foundation, and the characters populate this foundation. So we know that this is what is capable of happening in it. And now we're going to see what kind of characters and what portions of that capabilities we see moving forward. And then the second thing that it really sets up is the story. So we set up this world for this story to take place, and we set up that this is the kind of story that it's going to have a good side and an evil side. Right from the start, this is going to be a good versus evil story. We've got the good people who are the line of Riva. We've got, the lines of all the suns, things like that. We've got the people defending the world and the orb from Kaltorak. And then we've got Kaltorak and the Murgos, who are not good. They are who we are fighting against, and they want to possibly destroy the world. It's anger, it's hate, it's everything bad, and it's trying to take over the world. It's hoping to get the orb. Kaltorak wants the orb, and he wants to be able to use it to have wrath on the world. So we automatically set up with this story that this is the kind of story it's going to be. Then we also set up that the story is going to have a destiny of some kind for some character. And once we reach chapter 1, we realize it's going to be Garon. It's supposed to be kind of not said out loud, but it's very obvious that we have this whole story about the orb and the lines and how they're going to need to protect it. And then we pass right to Garon as our line of Riva. And it's obvious that he's the line of Riva from the cues that we've gotten from the prologue. So the prologue sets up that there's going to be some kind of destiny for some kind of descendant of Riva that deals with the orb. So we already know this story is going to be about the orb and keeping it from Kaltorak. We don't really know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know all the details, but we understand that it's going to be a good versus evil, trying to keep the orb away, and that Garon is going to be this character that has the destiny of whatever's going to happen to settle this orb dispute, or at least postpone it again for a while. We don't know exactly how it's going to end, but we know that he's going to be a big portion of this destiny, or whatever's supposed to happen between Kaltorak and the orb. It also, last but not least, sets up our story in the fact that we have clues and details that will then translate into the main story, and we can then infer things from that. For example, we describe who Belgariad is and Polgara is. So there are certain signs that we see then as we read, and we will know who that is. We also have, like the orb, the shape on his hand, the white circle that shows that he's supposed to be the guardian of the orb. So we get that from the prologue, and the prologue telling us this. So we get the beginning information that we're going to need in order to find and see the clues that are left for us in the narration as we continue in the present day of this story. Let me know what you think of the prologue. I would really love to know all the thoughts and feelings that you have down below, and to see if you think there's something else that the prologue does that I've missed, or if you just think there's something really cool about the prologue and the mythology of this world that you really would like to talk about. Let me know. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about point of view. As every single book, point of view is really important in the fact that it drives how we see the story, and the narration is such a big contributor to our thoughts and feelings on the story in general. If the narration is in a different point of view, it might mean that we connect or don't connect as well to the story at times. So I always like, when we first start a series, is to talk about point of view. And this one is third person omniscient. And it's very interesting because the last two stories that we've had on here, Mercy and Dragonlance, we've gotten a much closer look with the narration to the characters. It seems like You're in the story, you're interacting with the story and with the characters. It's very, very close knit to the characters. You're very close in to the story. Now, with this story, the third person narration is very far removed. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I felt like when I was looking at how we're interacting with Garon and Aunt Pole and Mr. Wolf and everything like that, we're really far back from the characters and from what's happening. It seems more like there's a screen and we're looking in at the story and we're being told what's happening and we get a sense of who these people are, but we're not directly in the story interacting with them close. We're not, getting to have a personal connection with them, to be more in their head, walking next to them, that kind of thing. Or as Mercy's concerned, with it being first person, you're actually directly in her head and like you are her at a lot of points. In this one, we have very big feeling of being stepped far away. We're watching from afar or looking in on the story. We're not actually directly in the story and interacting with the story. If you feel differently, I would really love to know. But for me, that's really how I felt, is that there is kind of this disconnect and that it's truly a feeling of that there is a narration in between the reader and the events and the characters. It doesn't feel like the narration is organic, a part of experiencing it. It's more like the narrator is talking to you and the narrator is telling you things about these characters instead of being close and personal with them. So yeah, it's very interesting because you can sense that the narrator is actually there versus other books where the narration seems more like the character or the characters that are being presented in the story. So what do you think? Do you feel like it's off-putting that you're so far removed? Do you sense the narrator there, or is that just me? Because I just really feel like, not that it's bad in any way, shape, or form, it's just different. It's just a different perspective. One that, as somebody who reads a lot of first-person narrated books versus third-person, I do read third-person, but a lot of the third-person that I do read is more like Dragonlance or ones where they're up close and personal with the character. They're not so much like in the character's head, but the narrator has a lot of elements of the characters wrapped into it. This one, it's very much I'm a narrator and I'm telling you what's happening, and it's more like painting an image for you. And the narrator is kind of its own thing versus it being blended in with the story and with the characters. So for me, it's a distinct difference to what I normally read. Maybe for you guys who read a lot more of those kind of narrations, it's not as jarring or as different for you. Either way, I would love to know your perspective about the narration. That would be really cool to have a discussion and to see what you like, what you dislike, if it bothers you, if it doesn't. Because in the end, it doesn't truly bother me. There are some stories that kind of point of view and that step back makes me hard to connect to the characters and hard for me to care. But David Eddings does a really good job with the point of view being the narration, but also having a connection to the characters and being interested in what's going on with them. So yeah, it's not quite as complex of a narration as we've had before, and it does seem that it is following Garon more than any other character. I don't really see it like jumping and jumping and jumping like it does in like Dragonlance per se. It seems more like it's very focused on Garon, but we definitely see that this is somebody who is telling the story to you versus you being following Garon around and he's the one taking you through the story. Now, I really want to go ahead and talk about the characters that we have established so far. This is the kind of story, as we've already kind of been prepped for, where, like, obviously Garon's, like, the person whose destiny is going to be fulfilled, I guess you could say, is that he's the person who is going to defeat Kaltorak or do whatever's going to be done with Kaltorak. He's going to be the main person conflicting with Kaltorak. As we've kind of already been set up, like I talked about with the prologue. But we have many we we have many supporting characters that are like main characters. So it's not quite going to be the same as a group of heroes like Dragonlance. Obviously, Garon's meant to be the one that the orb is being taken care of by, though we don't know exactly in what capacity that's happening right now. But we can tell that Aunt Pole and, other characters, Mr. Wolf, these are important characters that are going to be traveling with and supporting Garon. So I'd really like to go ahead and just talk about our first impressions of these characters, how we've been established by them, their role that we see so far in the story. So, of course, let's go ahead and talk first of all about Garon. We can already tell he's going to be the main person, as I've mentioned a couple times already. So it's really important for us to connect with him, for us to see what's going to happen with him. Obviously, we have a lot of mystery about his family, where he's from. I mean, we can tell he's not where, we were known for him to be. It's not like he's living in a castle. We're not seeing that he's even on the Isle of the Winds, I believe it was called, for where they were supposed to have established Riva's line is on that island. He went there and built his castle there. So we have a lot of mystery around him, but obviously he's supposed to be the one that's going to be the main person in this upcoming conflict. He's the important person to protect. He's the one that's supposed to protect the orb in the line of Riva. We also see that he's still really young. Like, I don't know about you guys, but it's surprising for us to see him in his childhood versus, being an adult ready to make this conflict. Why do we see him when he's only, a child? That's very, very interesting. We see that there's a lot of mystery around him still, and the fact that we don't know much about where he's come from, how he got to where he's at, and we see these mysterious instincts are taking over, especially when it deals with Kaltorak or fighting, or that case with the Murgo when he lies. He does it brilliantly, and he just acts on instinct. It just takes over him. And he doesn't really ever mention this to Aunt Pole that it's an instinct, or even question it. But we as a reader understand that something unique is happening with him, that something in his line has been passed down to him, and we're not really sure what that is or why that is happening specifically. And it seems that we are going to be able to grow with Garon. I think this is going to be really interesting to read and to see this character grow, because as most books happen when the character is old enough to do whatever is meant to happen. We've got 5 books in this series. So he's starting off really young, but over the course of these 5 books, he will probably grow up. He will probably take, his time getting to who he's supposed to be in order to fulfill whatever his destiny is going to be. So seeing him so young and knowing that he's going to be having to grow in order to get where he needs to go, and he's going to have these experiences to be able to be ready to face Kaltorak, is really interesting. So as we're reading this, we already can tell that this is a character that we're going to be growing with and seeing the progression, versus them already being at the point that they need to be. It's going to be a much more... Not saying that most stories do have a progression of the main character to get to the point that they need to be, or to grow over the story and the events. But this one is going to be a much more noticeable, much greater growth, because he starts off as so young. And, well, yes, technically he could possibly fulfill his destiny at age 14. But since we have so many books and we have so much story left to go, it is a good chance that we're going to see him grow up and grow into a man who will then be able to fulfill whatever destiny his role is supposed to be. And then we've got Aunt Pole. This is where we get back to the prologue, and I say that it sets up the story with details that are important for when you start reading the story. So the narrator has given some not so subtle hints that Aunt Pol is most likely Polgara from the prologue. We talk about the white streak in her hair, which is definitely a sign of Polgara. It's kind of interesting that nobody else in her life really makes the fact that Pol is could be short for Polgara, and she does have that strand like is known in the story. No one else seems to catch on to this possibility. But us, as just reading the prologue and then starting chapter 1 and being like, oh hey, this aunt of Garon's has a black hair with a streak of white down it. It's like, hint, hint, wink, wink much. So, though we don't know 100% certainly, it is very likely that this is Polgara, the magic user from the prologue. We have comments that she has also made about magic that seem like they're more serious and knowledgeable than they are meant to seem. She's very, very wise. She seems like somebody who is really mature and has bigger things on her brain than just a simple farm life. So those are all hints, not so subtly in my opinion, that lead us to believe that this is likely Polgara from the prologue. She's in charge of watching over Garon, as we've discussed also with Mr. Wolf, that she was told that this was going to be her role in whatever is happening in the outside world, that she was supposed to watch him and take care of him, raise him, and to teach him. So her role is pretty important, not just on a bigger scheme, but also in Garon's life. Is obviously she is the only caretaker that he knows. He really loves her, sees her as family and as his aunt. And so she's a very important part of Garon's life and in how he is being raised and formed into the man he's going to become, because obviously everyone's childhood is very important to the person as they grow up. And then she is really liked by the people at the farm. Falder really, really likes her and wishes that she was not going to be leaving when she says that she has to go take care of family business and will probably not be back. He's very, very disappointed. So obviously she has made connections here at this farm. And it seems that Dernick also has a soft spot for Pol, especially with, according to Garon, who thinks that Dernick must be in love with Aunt Pol and want to marry her. So we're going to see how that plays out, if these connections that she has helps her. Obviously with Falder, it helped them out being able to be at the farm, a place that obviously they weren't bothered for a very long time, for 14 years. And we're going to see if Dernick's, especially with how he's been integrated with going on the journey with them, how that's going to progress. And there's lots of mystery to her still so far, even though we have a good chance of it being Polgara. We still don't know exactly who she is, what she is. Still a lot of the character to be revealed of exactly who Polgara actually is now. We know where she came from. We have a sneaking suspicion that the narrator is not really all that subtle, and we get that this is where she's coming from and this is who she is, but we don't really know the character and who Polgara is. And obviously they've lived a long time, if we're gonna go by Mr. Wolf and his estimation of how old Belgariad would be, and she would then be the same age. So there's still a lot that we don't know, and that part is very intriguing, especially since Garon does not know who his Aunt Pol is. If we are correct and she is Polgara, how is that going to affect him when he finds out? And what is going to happen with that relationship? And then we move on to Mr. Wolf, who, again, the narrator, hint, hint, wink, wink, has given plenty of signs to believe that this is Polgara's father and Belgariad himself. So again, it's not really, the prologue sets it up, and then the narrator basically tells you the details that you were given in the prologue. Here they are yet again. He's much more mysterious than Aunt Pol in the fact that we really know nothing about him other than it's very likely that it's Belgariad. He tells that story like at the beginning, the one that was supposed to be for kings. That's basically the retelling of the prologue. Like, he actually knows the story. He talks about Belgariad and how old he is to Garon. He has lots of little subtle hints that this is him, especially with his relationship with Polgara, who is even more pronounced as possibly being Polgara. If just the interactions together, the way that they communicate secretly when Garon's only half awake, it's very unsubtle hints that this is gonna be Belgariad from the myth. And he's very much a troublemaker at this point, when at least concerning Pol and stealing food from her kitchen. He seems very lighthearted, much more lighthearted than Pol is at this moment, and that he is not carefree, but just more takes life as it comes, and a lot more got to see the fun in the world than Pol is at this moment. Not that Pol is very stuck up or anything like that, but she's just more stern with Garon, and Belgariad is much more, or Mr. Wolf is much more carefree, and of course he can take that role since he is not actually in charge of Garon at this moment. He is very wise, though. You can tell that he has those serious moments, that he obviously is very smart, he knows a lot, and he has even problems with the fact that Polgara has not taught Garon to read. So he does have opinions about Garon's upbringing as well. So he's much more mysterious than Pol is at this moment, but obviously since Pol is mysterious, he's even more mysterious, and we don't know much about him and what's happening. We just know that obviously he's a liaison between whatever's happening in the outside world and Pol, and is also helping watch over Garon by visiting them. And we've got Dernick. So Dernick seemed at the very beginning like he could be a washout character, someone who's just on this farm, but now he has officially entered the company that is going to be with Garon escaping from the farm. So he seems very, very close to both Pol and Garon. He really has watched over Garon when Pol is busy doing other things and telling him stuff about, smithing, telling him stuff about life, and has no problem with watching over him and keeping him out of other people's ways when Pol is not able to. Whether that's for Garon's sake or for Pol's sake, that's up to Garon. Apparently, it's for Pol's sake and the fact that he is interested in her, according to Garon. We haven't really seen enough of that ourselves, or at least I haven't, to know if Garon is correct or not. That is something that we will have to see in the future and see if something like that progresses. We're also going to see if we are correct that Polgara and Mr. Wolf are, or Aunt Pol and Mr. Wolf are Polgara and Belgariad, how Dernick will also take this news, since he's obviously been living with Garon and Aunt Pol and has known Mr. Wolf for a long time. It's going to be a shock to see that they're actually immortal and back from when the Earth was way, way back created, and are magic users. So we're going to see if we are correct about that, how that affects Dernick in this story, in this adventure. And he doesn't really know what he's even getting into, but he's helping them anyway. So obviously he has a very strong sense of loyalty, a very strong sense of protection. He jumps right in and is willing to follow them, even though he has no idea other than that it's dangerous, that they're trying to escape from something. He doesn't decide to stay on the farm. He doesn't take any moment's notice. He just is like, I'm coming with you. And with him, he is going. So we kind of see that he's a loyal character. He's somebody who's not afraid of getting into a little bit of mystery and into a little bit of problems for people who he cares about. And last but not least, I kind of wanted to mention Falder. I know that Falder is not at this point gonna be somebody who seems like he's in the story anymore after this chapter, since they're leaving and they're probably not coming back, but I felt like he was important to mention because he is important in Garon's upbringing. This is all he's known as Falder's farm. And Falder seems like a really nice guy, very fair guy. We see his opinions with the holiday that they took and how he wouldn't do any business with them, even though his daughter was raving at him about how that's not good business sense. But he really treats his people well. He cares about the people on his farm. He runs a good business. He has, loyal workers who like working there and living there. He obviously does well enough that he can have a big operation and to pay people and to celebrate and do things like that. So he has a lot of morals, he has a lot of goodness in his heart, and he is part of the role model that Garon has as he's growing up. Yes, he has Dernick as well, but Falder's like the head of the area and is somebody that can really impress upon, good values for how to treat people to Garon as he's living there. So yes, he's not really a big character, but I felt like he was a big enough character and an honorable enough character that I wanted to mention him and keep him in mind when we move forward with Garon, and just know that this is where he's come from. It's from somebody who runs his place like Falder does. Whew, okay. Is there any characters that you think I missed something on, that you think should have something else mentioned about them? Another character that I should have mentioned? Please let me know, as always, down below. If you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, anything at all, let me know. Now, last but not least is our Nitty Gritty section, as always. I have 3 points to bring up for our Nitty Gritty section today. And the first one is the rider in black on that horse that we keep seeing, through Garon keeps seeing, and how he has this notice or this instinct that he's always been there watching him, even though he hasn't always seen him. And there's some kind of contest between the two of them that should be kept between the two of them. It's very mysterious, it's very odd, it's very interesting. We're leading up with a lot of questions that need answers to later, like who the heck this is. Are they a good person? Are they a bad person? They obviously haven't attacked him yet or tried to kill him in any way, but he doesn't seem like, especially since the instinct that Garon has is that it's not a good person, somebody is going to be helping them. But he also doesn't want to mention it to Aunt Pole because he feels like it should be kept between the two of them. So we really don't have very many clues yet as to who that is or what's going to happen with that rider, especially since, Aunt Pole and Mr. Wolf have not noticed him or known about him in any way, shape, or form that we know of. Obviously, they could know of them and have not done anything yet, but it seems likely that at this point they don't know about this rider. And now that they're going to be on the road, how is this rider going to show up? Is the rider going to follow him? And if he does end up following him, how is he going to keep himself hidden from Pole and Dernick and Mr. Wolf? So let's go ahead and keep that rider in mind. We're going to see where things go with him. It's very, very interesting, very mysterious, very just odd. And we're going to see how that goes. The second thing to keep in mind is the instincts that are taking over Garon from time to time. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I think that that's something important that we are going to have to keep seeing come up, especially since he's still young and doesn't have technically any training on fighting or anything like that. But these instincts just seem to take over for him. Whether it's instincts about how he should behave, whether it's kind of like, battle ready. We're going to have to see how that progresses, and it's going to be an interesting answer to get to the question of what the heck that means and why. Because weren't ever mentioned that, the line of river was going to have this knowledge. Maybe it's from the orb, and maybe it's not, since the orb is something that he is going to be a guardian of, as it seems, since he does have the mark, the ribbon mark. So we're going to find out exactly what these instincts are. We should keep them in mind and the fact that they could pop up at any moment. And they might help Garon or they might hinder him. We're not really sure at this point what the instincts are triggered by. And then third is the orb itself. The orb is the reason that we are in the conflict that we are in right now, is that Kaltork wants it, and the good guys stole it back, or at least our version of who the good guys are stole it back, and are now guarding it from him because he wants to hurt the mortal world. He wants to burn it all down, possibly. We're not exactly sure what kind of revenge he's going to take once he gets the orb back, but we just know it's going to be bad. So we're keeping it away from Kaltork. And apparently it can see the past, the present, and the future. So that is its power, or at least one of its powers. We don't know everything about the orb. It was just kind of it was just a basic understanding of that this orb has power and that Kaltork wanted it. He stole it and it rejected him, and now it is needing to be protected because the power in the wrong hands could be harmful. So we don't know where it is, we don't know what's happened to it at this point, and we only know that Garon seems to be the person who's supposed to be guarding it, but he's not around it. He's not even where he's supposed to be. Like we mentioned before, he's not on the Isle of the Winds, where his ancestors were supposed to have made a fortress to be able to guard it over there. So we are not really sure what's going on with this orb and where it's at and what is guarding it at this point in time. We're really unsure about a lot of questions when it comes, a lot of situations when it comes to the orb and what Garon's role is at this point. We don't really know what's happened, how we've gotten here. There's been lots of years that have gone past, so we don't understand that. So let's go ahead and make sure that we keep in mind that even though the orb is not seen at this point, that it is still important to be in our minds, in our quest as we move forward, since this is in the end all about the orb and keeping it away from Kaltork. Okay, that was all I had for today. As always, comment down below if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, if you felt like I missed anything. I know I kind of talked about just the basics today, but I felt like that's what we have at the start of this book, is just the very basics of setting up our characters, setting up our scene, setting up who our main players are going to be. We don't really have a lot of crazy things that have happened yet. It's really kind of mundane, seeing where Garon has started and giving us a starting point. But if I missed anything crucial, of course let me know. There's many ways to contact me. You can either comment down below and we can have a conversation together, or you're welcome to comment on my Twitter or talk to me on my Facebook page. Both of them are Fantasy Fiction 1. So it's going to be Twitter at FantasyFiction1 and then Facebook.com/FantasyFiction1. You're welcome to go ahead and check out my blog and contact me on there. I have a contact page on there. Go ahead and look at any content that you want on there as well. I post blog posts every week about fantasy fiction. There's a lot of recommendations, reviews, just, deliberations and thoughts about different fantasy topics on there. And you can also email me if that works best for you. However you'd like to reach out, I would love, love, love to have a discussion with you and to learn more about fantasy and characters of different stories and books and things together with you. So for the next Pawn of Prophecy class, go ahead and read chapters 6 through 10, which on my version, which is this one right here, is going to be pages 71 through 137. So I will go ahead and see you in the next class. I hope that you are enjoying this book and the Mercy book as well. I hope that this gives you a little bit of diversity in what you choose to read and follow along with, and that you enjoy. All right, I will see you guys next time. Bye.